Welcome to Bay Area Psychology. A few weeks ago, we hosted a show on spiritual counseling to learn more about the relevance of the spiritual realm to everyday heartache and psychological challenges. Tonight, I will do a follow-up on spiritual blocks, which often get in the way for those of us who wish to access the divine to assist our healing. For the purposes of tonight's discussion, we will separate religion from spirituality in this way. Spirituality is an expanded sense of connection to a source of energy, love, and creativity beyond our own personal resources. Religion is the formal path we choose to access this source of connection. For many of us, the teachings and dogmas of religion as a path may have created stumbling blocks, which have cut us off from spirituality as well. When looking at clinical versus spiritual counseling, we could not help but reflect that as humans, we tend to be uncomfortable with ambiguity. We want resolutions, answers, and information. We want to fix the problem, whatever it may be, as soon as possible. Managed healthcare, dominated by a biological model of human behavior, supports this quick approach by strongly promoting brief therapy counseling, which has become actually a triage specialty under this model. Our pain is treated when we are at medical necessity. Spiritual crisis is certainly not identified in this model as a medical necessity. There is not a medical protocol for treating a crisis of faith or life meaning. Counseling that includes the spiritual as well as physical, intellectual, and emotional is often messy, ambiguous, time-consuming, and often requires us to stay uncomfortable as we sort our way through the impact and the impasses where we find ourselves. This discomfort is complicated by strong histories with religion and faith traditions that can block our ability to go forward. I will turn to a book called Stumbling Blocks, Stepping Stones by Father Benedict Greshel to give us guidance as we explore these stuck places. But the most obvious place to begin our investigation is to ask, why would we include a part of ourselves that might magnify our discomfort? Well, the other day I was having coffee with an associate interfaith minister who will be ordained in October. He has been counseling for 17 years, and I have been counseling for 10. Between the two of us, we identified that of all the people we had seen, almost every person, sooner or later, wound up wondering about their life's purpose, wondering if there was meaning beyond the obvious. What fascinates me is the consistency of our experiences and the universality of this concern. It did not matter if the reason for counseling was marital, anxiety, depression, work-related, or addiction. If a person stayed in counseling longer than a few short weeks, this question would arise. The conclusion I have drawn from this is the inevitability of spirituality. Our connection with each other, the universe, and the earth is as real as the weight of our hand and the warmth of our breath. Now, Father Greshel discusses the block, first of all, of pretentious religion. Let's take a look at this. Pretentious religion, judgmental or self-righteous approach to faith. Some of us were exposed to exaggerated examples of piety and attention to appearance, which quickly turned to judgment and hypocrisy when the spotlights dimmed. Being on either side of self-righteousness or judgment is alienating. Self-righteous judgment is poor company late at night or when grief comes. It can be so tempting to look good through moral righteousness, but painful to have never really identified our personal ethics or values. My sister once said to me, it's a shame that people leave the church to get heard or get non-judgmental support. It's not supposed to be that way. Well, indeed it's not. In my experience, when we are less certain of ourselves and less certain of our relationship with the divine, we crave structure. We feel safer with strict rules, black and white definitions, and will resist attempts to challenge or change this structure. The dogma of religion has become more important than the people in it. In The Wide Open Door, Tav Sparks shares the following allegory from Brother David Steindl-Rast. He says that the birth of every great spiritual tradition is like the eruption of a volcano. The fire and molten lava is like the original revelation, in the light of the creative spiritual power that has come from the source. As the lava flows down the mountain, it begins to cool and gradually harden until it becomes immovable, solid rock. According to Brother David, this is what happens to religion. The fire of the original experience loses its power and along the way hardens into mere dogma and belief. What is left is the form of the original revelation, but the spirit of it has disappeared. I have observed that the need for this inflexible structure is ego-based. We need the structure, God doesn't. You know, there's a wonderful story I want to insert at this point. Isaac of Thebes. Isaac of Thebes was staying in a monastery one night, and he happened to observe a fellow brother sinning. So he condemned him in his heart, and he said, this is terrible, and he passed judgment. So on the way back later to his monastic cell, an angel was standing in the doorway, and the angel said, God has asked me to ask you where he should put the fallen brother that you have condemned. Well, Isaac of Thebes was terribly repentant at that point and decided that if in fact God did not judge the sinner, who was he to do so? I think a lot of times we need that kind of humbling experience to remind us that holding other people accountable to our belief system may, in fact, create more distance than help us to connect. Now, let me move to a related stumbling block, and this is what Father Greshel calls immature faith. He describes immature faith as a failure to grow beyond the image of God, remaining stuck in childhood faith without examining it for personal beliefs or values. Moving past these early beliefs we were given requires us to face doubt and darkness, which is the only way to evaluate our beliefs and own them as an adult.
Hospitals on drug treatment.
I was raised Roman Catholic. I love Jesus. I love the whole idea of a compassionate, spiritual person. I love the message that he gave. It's just there was something about it that I didn't care for. You know, it's nice to put $2 in a basket that goes around on a Sunday morning, but it's hands-on. I gotta be hands-on. For me, spirituality is, bam, it's hands-on. If I'm not having hands-on experience, it's worthless. I was hurting. Yeah, I was lonely. I was incredibly lonely, feeling disassociated with all of society.
It may be that the result of this search may be that you agree with the values established in your childhood. And you may also find another faith tradition is a better match for your spiritual voice. Donald, in our film clip, later moved and decided to become a Buddhist monk. He found that the Buddhist tradition of service matched more highly his spiritual beliefs. Now, this crisis of faith that occurs when you begin to evaluate and question your beliefs for yourself leaves a temporary void. And for those of us who were discouraged from doubt or questioning, this void can be especially painful. In the feminine face of God, we are reminded that although we do not always know the way to God, our collective heart reminds us again and again as we sit in the silence that God knows the way to us. Let me share another example of this kind of struggle and kind of faith. And this is the story of Becky, and I'm going to peek here in my notes. Becky is a 50-year-old prescription medication addict who entered recovery when her physician no longer agreed to write her prescriptions. She grew up in a conservative small town in the Midwest where Christian-based family values were the norm. Becky's family attended a fundamentalist church where Becky learned that people were born as sinners and could only be saved through Christ. However, belief did not seem to be enough, and Becky was encouraged to constantly look inside herself for evidence of rebellion against God, and that she should measure herself against Christ. She repeatedly found herself falling short and missing the mark, and Becky's family believed in corporal punishment, but primarily disciplined her through shame and pointing out how she had disappointed God. As an adult, Becky is a constant trier. She tries to be cheerful, compliant, and is never confrontive or difficult. Inside, Becky's enraged at what she's come to think of as God's impossible standards, and she cannot separate God from her parents. Now, there's a classic example of one of us, there are many of us who feel trapped by what we came to believe as impossible beliefs of perfection that may or may not have ever been real. And we're so afraid of being judged, we're so afraid of these perfectionist requirements that we in fact avoid any reference or any connection at all with the divine or God of any kind. There's this fear that somehow we're always going to be judged as inadequate. This is a painful place to be, and it's the reason a lot of people avoid recovery. It's a lot of the reason people avoid any kind of religious or spiritual information. They cannot seem to get past the word God without feeling condemned. Now, some of us have been hurt by what Father Greshel calls simony, or the purchase or sale of the church office. Now, this is when organized religion begins to look like a racket. I don't know how many of you saw the Steve Martin film, Leap of Faith, which talked about him exploiting religion for power and for money, which is, of course, exactly our definition. He, in fact, played a faith healer and would do things like plant people in the audience that he could supposedly heal. There are many of us who've come to believe that this is standard for those who are in public ministry. And when we come back from our break, we'll talk a little further about how this could possibly happen. Stay with us.